Most people think the lobotomy was some dark fringe experiment that happened in the shadows of American medicine. A few rogue doctors doing things they were not supposed to do. That is not what happened. The lobotomy was mainstream. It was celebrated. It won the Nobel Prize in 1949. Walter Freeman, the man who made it famous in America, was not hiding from the medical establishment. He was invited to teach at their conferences. He was featured in Life magazine. Hospitals called him and asked him to come perform the procedure on their patients. By the time anyone bothered to actually study whether it worked, over 40,000 Americans had already had metal driven through their eye sockets into their brains, and most of them never got better. They just got quiet. That is the part nobody talks about. America did not stumble into the lobotomy by accident. The country chose it, endorsed it, scaled it like a public health campaign. And it all started because psychiatric hospitals were drowning. By the mid-1940s, over 500,000 Americans were locked inside state mental institutions. The wards were packed beyond capacity. Patients lived in hallways. There were no treatments that worked, no medications, nothing. Families committed their loved ones, and those people just stayed there for years, for decades. Some died there without ever leaving. The medical establishment was desperate for anything that could empty those wards, anything that looked like progress. Freeman gave them something that looked like progress. In 1936, a Portuguese neurologist named Antonio Egas Moniz published results from a new surgery he called the prefrontal leucotomy. He drilled holes into the skull and severed connections in the frontal lobe of the brain. Moniz claimed it calmed patients who had been violently mentally ill. He had done the procedure on fewer than 100 patients. He had done almost no long-term follow-up. But the idea spread fast. Freeman read about it and brought the technique to America. He and his partner James Watts started performing lobotomies in 1936. They opened the skull. They cut into the brain. It took hours. It required an operating room and a neurosurgeon. But Freeman wanted something faster, something cheaper, something any doctor could do. So in 1946, Freeman invented a new method. He called it the transorbital lobotomy. You did not need to open the skull. You went in through the eye socket. Freeman used a tool that looked exactly like an ice pick because the first time he did the procedure, that is exactly what he used. An actual ice pick from his kitchen drawer. He tested the technique on cadavers in his home. Then he tried it on a live patient in his office. It worked like this. Freeman used electroshock to knock the patient unconscious. Then he lifted the eyelid. He placed the point of the ice pick above the eyeball, just under the bone of the eye socket. He tapped it with a hammer to break through. Then he pushed the pick about 3 inches into the brain. He swept it side to sever the frontal lobe connections. Then he did the other eye. The whole thing took 10 minutes. No scalpel, no operating room, no anesthesia, and no external scars. Freeman believed he had solved the problem. He thought he had made lobotomy so simple that general practitioners could perform it, that psychiatrists could do it between appointments, that America could finally empty its asylums. But Freeman never studied what the procedure actually did to people long term. He never ran controlled trials. He just started doing it, a lot. His partner James Watts saw the ice pick method and refused to participate. He called it reckless. He ended their partnership. Freeman did not stop. He kept going. And in 1949, something happened that changed everything. Antonio Egas Moniz won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine for inventing the lobotomy. Not for proving it worked, not for patient outcomes, for the idea itself. The Nobel Committee said the procedure had potential to cure mental illness. That was enough. Freeman saw the Nobel Prize as proof he had been right all along. The award gave him credibility he had not earned. Hospitals that had been skeptical started calling. Medical schools invited him to demonstrate the procedure. Mainstream journals published glowing reviews. The Saturday Evening Post ran a feature calling Freeman a pioneer. Life magazine photographed him mid-procedure, smiling with an ice pick in his hand. He was not a pariah, he was a celebrity, and nobody asked the most basic question. Does this actually help people? Freeman kept records, meticulous records. He wrote to former patients. He sent them Christmas cards. He tracked whether they were still institutionalized or living at home. He called that success. If a patient was discharged, Freeman marked them improved. But improved did not mean healthy. It did not mean the person could hold a job or maintain relationships or feel the full range of human emotion. It meant they were manageable. It meant they were compliant. It meant they stopped being a problem for the people around them. Freeman's own data showed that many lobotomized patients lost the ability to plan or initiate action. They became passive. Their personalities flattened. Some lost control of their bladder and bowels. Some had seizures for the rest of their lives. And some died. Freeman's records show a mortality rate of about 2.5% directly from the procedure. That is 1 death for every 40 lobotomies. Freeman knew that. He just did not talk about it in magazine interviews. By the early 1950s, Freeman had performed thousands of lobotomies, and he decided to take the procedure on the road. Freeman bought a van and turned it into a mobile operating unit. He called it the Lobotomobile. By 1952, he was driving it from state hospital to state hospital, performing lobotomies in assembly line fashion. He would show up at an institution and do 20 procedures in a single day. Sometimes 25. He treated it like a vaccination campaign. Get in. Get the ice pick. Get out. Move to the next patient. Hospital administrators loved him. They had wards full of patients they could not treat and no money to hire more staff. Freeman offered a solution that was fast and cheap. 10 minutes per patient. No operating room needed. No recovery time. Patients could walk out the same day. Freeman would set up in any available room, a classroom, an office, wherever there was space and a table. He brought his own ice picks. He brought his electroshock machine. He brought a camera. Freeman photographed everything. He took pictures of himself mid-procedure, ice pick in hand, smiling at the camera. He took before and after photos of patients. He documented every case in leather-bound journals. He was building a record, proof that his method worked. Except he was not measuring whether people got better. He was measuring whether they got quieter. There is a difference. One of Freeman's patients was a woman named Helen Mortensen. She was a housewife from Oregon. She had been struggling with anxiety and depression after the birth of her child. Her husband brought her to a psychiatrist in 1948. The psychiatrist recommended a lobotomy. Helen was 34 years old. She went into the procedure able to care for her children and manage her home. She came out unable to do either. She could not plan meals. She could not follow simple instructions. Her emotions flattened. Her husband later said it was like living with a stranger who looked like his wife. Helen lived another 40 years in that condition. Freeman marked her case as improved because she was no longer anxious. She was not anxious because she could barely feel anything at all. That is what improved meant in Freeman's records. Freeman sent Christmas cards to his former patients every year, thousands of them. He tracked who responded and who did not. If someone wrote back and said they were living at home, Freeman called that a success. It did not matter if they could hold a job. It did not matter if they had friends. It did not matter if their family had to care for them like children. They were out of the hospital. That counted as progress. But Freeman was not lying to himself. His own data showed the problems. Around 15% of his patients had seizures after the procedure. Some lost control of their bladder and bowels permanently. Some gained massive amounts of weight because the brain damage affected their ability to feel full. And 2.5% died. Not from complications years later. They died from the lobotomy itself. Brain hemorrhage, infection, shock. 1 in every 40 people Freeman lobotomized did not survive the procedure. Freeman knew that. He wrote it down. He just did not talk about it when reporters came around. In 1949, Life magazine ran a photo essay on Freeman. They called him a pioneer. They showed pictures of him performing the procedure. The article said he was saving people from hopeless insanity. It did not mention the mortality rate. It did not mention the seizures. It did not mention that most patients lost something essential about who they were. The media presented Freeman as a hero, and families believed it. They brought their loved ones to him voluntarily. A mother in West Virginia brought her 12-year-old son. The boy had behavioral problems at school. He talked back to teachers. He got into fights. Freeman lobotomized him in 1951. The boy survived, but he never finished school. He could not hold a job as an adult. His mother spent the rest of her life caring for him. Freeman marked the case as successful because the boy stopped fighting. Freeman lobotomized children as young as 4 years old. He lobotomized a girl named Carol Ann in 1948. She was 4. Her parents said she had violent tantrums. Freeman believed early intervention would prevent worse problems later. Carol Ann lost the ability to speak in full sentences. She was institutionalized as a teenager and spent the rest of her life in state care. Freeman did not see these outcomes as failures. He saw them as trade-offs. Better to be docile than violent. Better to be calm than suicidal. Better to be manageable than disruptive. And for the institutions, that was enough. Hospitals were not trying to heal people. They were trying to control them. Freeman gave them a tool that worked for that purpose. By the mid-1950s, Freeman had personally performed around 3,000 lobotomies. But thousands of other doctors had started doing the procedure too. Freeman had trained them. He held workshops on weekends. He invited psychiatrists and general practitioners to watch him work. Then he let them try it themselves under his supervision. No formal certification, no lengthy training. Just a weekend course, and you could start lobotomizing patients on Monday. The procedure spread faster than anyone tracked. Estimates say somewhere between 40,000 and 50,000 Americans were lobotomized between 1936 and the early 1960s. Nobody knows the exact number because many hospitals did not keep detailed records. Some patients were lobotomized without their families even being told. They were wards of the state. Nobody had to ask permission. But there was one case that should have stopped everything. In 1941, a girl named Rosemary Kennedy had a lobotomy. She was 23. She was the sister of John F. Kennedy. Their father Joseph arranged it without telling his wife. Rosemary had been described as high-spirited, maybe mildly, intellectually disabled. She liked to go out dancing. She was interested in boys. That made her father nervous. He was planning a political future for his sons. He could not have a daughter whose behavior might embarrass the family. So, he had her lobotomized. Rosemary was awake during the procedure. The doctors asked her to sing and recite prayers while they cut into her brain. They kept going until her words stopped making sense. Then they stopped. Rosemary came out of that procedure unable to walk without help. She could not speak clearly. She had the cognitive ability of a young child. Joseph Kennedy sent her to an institution in Wisconsin and did not visit her for 20 years. The family did not talk about what happened. They told people she was teaching disabled children at a school. The truth did not come out until the 1960s. By then, Freeman had already done thousands more procedures. The Rosemary Kennedy case proves something important. This was not just being done to people society had already forgotten. It was being done to the daughters of wealthy, powerful families. And nobody stopped it. That is how much trust people had in the procedure. If a Kennedy could be lobotomized, anyone could. The lobotomy did not end because someone stopped Freeman. It did not end because hospitals realized what they had done. It ended because pharmaceutical companies invented drugs that did the same thing. Thorazine hit the market in 1954. Chlorpromazine. It calmed patients down without surgery. It was cheaper than a lobotomy. It was reversible. and it did not require Freeman. By the late 1950s, hospitals stopped calling him. They did not need the lobotomobile anymore. They had pills. Freeman kept performing lobotomies into the 1960s anyway, fewer and fewer each year. But he never stopped believing he had been right. In 1967, Freeman lobotomized a woman named Helen Mortensen for the third time. He had already lobotomized her twice before. She came back because the first two procedures had not worked. Freeman tried again. Helen died on the operating table from a brain hemorrhage. The hospital banned Freeman from performing surgery. He was 72 years old. He had spent 40 years driving ice picks into people's brains. That was the end. Not a trial, not a reckoning, just a quiet ban from one hospital. Freeman died in 1972. He never apologized. He never said he had been wrong. In his final interviews, he said the medical community had abandoned a useful tool too quickly. He believed history would prove him right. It did not. But here is what should disturb you. Freeman was not a monster. He was not hiding his work. He was not operating in secret. He did everything in the open. He published his results. He taught other doctors. He invited reporters to watch. He believed completely that he was helping people. And for decades, the entire American medical establishment agreed with him. That is the part that should keep you up at night. This was not one man doing terrible things in the shadows. This was a system that looked at a procedure with no evidence and decided it was worth celebrating. Hospitals that saw a surgery with a mortality rate of 2.5% and decided that was acceptable. Families that trusted doctors enough to let them drive metal through their child's brain, and a society that believed progress meant finding faster ways to make inconvenient people quiet. You might be thinking, that could never happen now, that we have regulations, that we have oversight, that we learned. But think about what had to be true for the lobotomy to spread the way it did. It required institutions that were overwhelmed and desperate for solutions. It required a charismatic advocate who believed in what he was doing. It required a society willing to trust authority without demanding proof. And it required victims who had no power to say no. Those conditions still exist. Right now there are people in institutions who cannot advocate for themselves. Right now there are treatments being used widely before long-term studies are complete. Right now there are doctors who genuinely believe they are helping while they are doing harm. The lobotomy was not an accident. It was not a failure of one person. It was a failure of a system that valued efficiency over humanity, that valued control over care, that valued the appearance of progress over actual outcomes. And nobody stopped it until something more convenient came along. Freeman lobotomized around 3,000 people personally, but he trained hundreds of other doctors who went on to lobotomize thousands more, 40,000 to 50,000 Americans total. Most of them are dead now. The ones who survived lived with the consequences for the rest of their lives. Some could not work. Some could not form relationships. Some could not feel the full range of human emotion ever again. Their families had to care for them. And many of those families were told they had made the right choice, that the procedure had saved their loved one, that things would have been worse without it. There was never a national apology, no compensation, no investigation. The medical community just quietly moved on. The lobotomy became something people did, not talk about, a mistake best forgotten. Except it was not a mistake, it was a decision, repeated tens of thousands of times over 3 decades, by doctors who took an oath to do no harm, in hospitals that were supposed to heal people, with the full support of medical journals and professional organizations and the Nobel Prize Committee. That is not a mistake. That is a choice. And the thing about choices is, they reveal what you actually value when things get difficult. When the mental hospitals were overflowing and families were desperate and state budgets were stretched thin, America chose efficiency. It chose a procedure that made patients manageable over one that made them better. It chose a solution that looked like progress over one that required patience and resources and real care. The lobotomy worked exactly as intended. It just was not intended to help the patient. It was intended to help everyone around the patient. And for a long time, that was enough. You started this thinking the lobotomy was an outlier, a dark chapter that happened because we did not know better. But we did know better. Freeman's partner quit because he knew it was reckless. Patients came out of the procedure unable to care for themselves, and everyone just called that improvement. The mortality rate was documented and nobody stopped. The lobotomy happened because when institutions are desperate and someone offers a fast solution, people stop asking whether it actually works. They just ask whether it solves their immediate problem. And if the people being hurt have no voice, no power, and no way to say no, then nothing stops it until something easier comes along. That is the truth the lobotomy reveals about how we treat the vulnerable when nobody is watching. Not that we are cruel, that we are practical. And sometimes practical is worse.